Black music in America has an immense impact on how we listen to music today. However, the roots of black music come straight from Africa, just like the people that made it. African drums are an important part of making music, used for communication as well as entertainment. During the time of enslavement of African people in America, instruments were not allowed. Hamboning was the solution to this. Patting Juba, or Hamboning, was a form of expression to make percussion sounds on your body. Hamboning was used in work songs as well as folk spirituals. This music form also crossed over into other disciplines. William Henry Lane was a master at the art of Hambone, so much that he was known as the Master Juba. His creativity in using his body as an instrument, combined with dance, led him to become the father of American tap dance. Folk or Negro spirituals were an early form of music that evolved from enslaved Africans in the United States. These songs were call and response songs that were sung during work, as well as private worship. One major factor in these songs is that they often have a theme that yearned for freedom. Two of the most well-known spirituals in America are Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Wade in the Water. Gospel hymns became prominent in the 1850s during the widespread Protestant move to large cities. However, it was not until Reverend Charles Albert Tinley began composing gospel hymns that became a hallmark of the black church. This Methodist preacher wrote notable songs such as Take Your Burden to the Lord and Leave It There. He also wrote I'll Overcome Someday, which is credited with being the basis of the popular song We Shall Overcome, made notable during the Civil Rights Movement. Following the rise of hymns was the Jubilee Quartet, evolving from the style of gospel choirs, the black barbershop harmonies, and call and response of folk spirituals. A distant sound is created. One famous example of the sound is Swan Silvertone's Rock My Soul. This style is still used in gospel music today and is easily recognizable. From the gospel, we developed the blues. Thought to have originated on plantations in the Mississippi Delta, the blues is born out of African music as well as spirituals. The songs had similar musical stylings, but the lyrics were tied to the difficulties that people faced in a secular way. The three-line style of blues came from work, protest, and worship songs. Boogie Woogie was a primarily piano-based and very rhythmic style of music made famous in the 1800s. Coming from the stylings of folk blues and brass bands, it is said to have been inspired by the rhythmic clacking of train wheels heard in the South. It is a bridge to what we know as blues today. It's because of Boogie Woogie, classic blues artists had a chance to entertain and even own establishments. These artists are the first African American artists to have blues recordings. One example is Mamie Smith's recording Crazy Blues. This song sold over 75,000 copies. Known as the Queen of Blues, Smith's influence opened the door for several famous blues artists such as Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and Ethel Waters. Characterized by vocal slides, moans, and shouts, this style of singing had tremendous influence and revolutionized popular music in America. Without classic blues, there'd be no Bing Crosby, no Sinatra, no Elvis. Gospel music was not only influenced by blues, but what we know as jazz as well. Brass bands were military bands, largely associated with the Black Union soldiers. These trans musicians were skilled at playing patriotic songs, marches, and hymns. Former military musicians began composing music in a spontaneous way during gatherings and in clubs. The music was also associated with stereotypical portrayal of Black Americans at the time. In 1897, Harlem Rock was published by Tom Tupin, becoming the first ragtime song produced by an African-American artist. It laid the groundwork for the king of ragtime writers, Mr. Scott Joplin. In 1899, Maple Leaf Rag became a mainstream hit. Ragtime music was distinct in the arrangement of repeats and reprises. Scott Joplin was extremely talented at creating these arrangements, a trained pianist and a music teacher. Joplin led ragtime to its heights at the Chicago World's Fair of 1897. Ragtime would remain popular until around 1970, when a new sound was bursting out onto the scene. from the call and response singing done in public, New Orleans jazz is a mix of several different musical styles, gathering influence from ragtime, blues, gospel, as well as European classical. This style became a blend that was unique and distinct to the area. The ability to improvise and extend songs was due to many early musicians not being able to read music. Early jazz ensembles were made up of 7 members. Buddy Bolin is credited with assembling the first one. This launched jazz to national prominence. By the Harlem Renaissance, jazz was loved by many.
In the early 1900s, there began to be a change in gospel music. Paul Robeson's Go Down Moses was a shift in style of gospel music to artists singing with musical accompaniment in a conscious style. This shows some European influence as gospel music began to become more mainstream. Famous ragtime pianist Thomas Dorsey became known as the father of gospel music. He took the lyrics of hymns and the sounds of ragtime and blues to create something new, spiritual music that was upbeat, rhythmic, and accompanied by instruments. His new style was at first rejected for sounding too secular. However, with artists such as Mahalia Jackson, Sally Martin, and Willie Mae Ford Smith, gospel had a new audience as many African Americans migrated from the South to larger cities, specifically Chicago. Charley Pride is probably the first name you think of when you think of roots of black country music, and with good reason. However, before Charley Pride, there was DeFord Bailey. This pioneer of country music was a world-class harmonica player and the first ever musician introduced on the Grand Ole Opry in 1927. Known as the Harmonica Wizard, Bailey was a fan favorite and one of the premier acts on the show. His trademark song, Pan American Blues, was his most popular work. However, Bailey also played the guitar, bones, and banjo. The influence of other genres was carried into country music by the black artists that helped to shape it. The Harlem Renaissance was a period of rich artistic and cultural activity among African Americans between the end of World War I and the early years of the Great Depression. Centered in Harlem, New York, music was one of the forms of art that made significant changes. There were several musical artists that shaped the landscape of music. Louis Armstrong, dubbed the world's greatest trumpet player, this jazz singer-musician developed an experimental and improvisatory method to playing jazz. Known as Satchmo, Armstrong was not only a Grammy Award-winning artist, but the first black man to host a radio show in the United States. Billie Holiday. This singer became one of the most famous on the nightclub scene during this time. Her incredible and recognizable voice is described as earthy and mellow, and she was an exceptional at the vocal improvisation of jazz. Holiday became the first black woman artist to perform with a full orchestra. Duke Ellington. This fantastic pianist became a house regular at the Cotton Club during the 1920s. He is credited with pioneering big jazz bands and evolution from the original 7-person ensemble. Ellington eventually expanded his band to 14 members, and some of them remained with the band for decades. Ella Fitzgerald. This singer became known as the Queen of Jazz, or the First Lady of Song. Fitzgerald won an amateur night at the Apollo Theater, and that landed her a spot with Chick Webb's band. Her incredible vocal range as well as scatting ability earned her great popularity and success, along with recording over 2,000 songs. Ella Fitzgerald was the first black woman to headline at the Copacabana and the first black woman to win a Grammy. Chick Webb, the man that became known as the King of Swing. This talented drummer was a regular at the famous Savoy Ballroom. Despite acquiring a physical disability due to tuberculosis, Webb played on a modified drum set. This talented musician never learned to read music, but had an uncanny memory, and he could memorize any composition. His complex and multi-layered drum solos were said to dazzle audiences. Blues continued to evolve like other genres. Classic blues led its way to Chicago and down-home blues. Artists such as Howlin' Wolf led the way to the king of blues himself, B.B. King, a self-taught musician that was a guitarist, singer, songwriter, and record producer. King introduced a complex guitar solo style based on string bending, strumming vibrato, and staccato picking. He was recognized as the single most important electric guitarist of the last half of the 20th century by AllMusic. Sister Rosetta Tharpe became known first for her gospel recordings, but her talent for playing the electric guitar led to crossover appeal to the creators of R&B, as well as the pioneers of rock and roll. The electric guitar is a key component to rock and Tharpe's use of distortion on her guitar, which led to further evolutions of blues, as well as had a profound effect on early rock and roll artists such as Chuck Berry and Little Richard.
Black American music is a rich tapestry woven from the experiences, struggles, triumphs, and creativity of Black Americans. From spirituals sung in the fields during slavery to the global influence of hip-hop, Black American music tells a story of resilience and innovation. This segment will focus on the music genres that defined the 1940s through the 1970s, exploring their cultural significance and highlighting key musicians. Rock and roll emerged in the 1950s as a dynamic blend of rhythm and blues, gospel, and country music. Black American artists laid a foundation, fusing energetic rhythms with emotionally charged lyrics. The genre's driving beats and electric guitar riffs symbolize youthful rebellion and freedom, resonating with audiences across racial lines. Chuck Berry, known as the father of rock and roll, Berry revolutionized music with his guitar riffs, storytelling, and stage performance. His songs like Johnny B. Good became anthems of the era. Little Richard, with his flamboyant style and electrifying performances. Little Richard's hits like Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally broke barriers and influenced countless musicians. Fats Domino, his smooth vocals and piano-driven hits like Ain't That a Shame showcased the connection between R&B and rock and roll. Rock and roll drew heavily from Black American music traditions, including blues, gospel, and swing. The energy and improvisation of these genres became hallmarks of the new sound. The music's theme of love, freedom, and resilience reflected the aspirations and struggles of Black Americans in a segregated society. While white artists like Elvis Presley popularized the genre for mainstream audiences, Black pioneers remained its true architects. Rock and roll challenged racial norms, creating opportunities for integration in music and beyond. Doo-wop. Doo-wop emerged from urban Black communities, particularly in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Detroit. It featured vocal harmonies, simple melodies, and rhythmic backing, often performed by small groups. Rooted in gospel and barbershop quartet traditions, doo-wop emphasized storytelling and emotional connection. The Platters, known for their polished harmonies and crossover appeal, hits like Only You and The Greatest Pretender made them one of the era's most successful groups. The Drifters, with a rotating lineup of talented vocalists. The Drifters' songs like There Goes My Baby blended doo-wop and R&B. The Five Saints, their ballad In the Still of the Night became a quintessential doo-wop classic. Doo-wop reflected the communal spirit of Black neighborhoods with its roots in street corner singing and church choirs. The genre's focus on love and relationships resonated with listeners from all backgrounds, bridging cultural divides. Doo-wop groups paved the way for future vocal harmony acts and influenced the development of soul music in the 1960s. The genre's success demonstrated the universal appeal of Black American music.
The 1970s is considered a golden era of music and talent. Soul power dominated the culture and the airwaves. Marvin Gaye, the Prince of Motown, is known for his tremendous contributions to soul and R&B. His 1971 album, What's Going On, not only displayed his talent as a singer and songwriter, but gave the world an introduction to his willingness to challenge social norms. He also showed his versatility with sensual chart toppers such as Sexual Healing. No longer Little Stevie Wonder. By the 1970s, Stevie Wonder revolutionized music with his use of synthesizers and innovative compositions. During the 70s, Wonder released 3 albums and cemented his legacy as a composer, songwriter, and musical visionary.
By the 1970s, Wonder was co-writing all of his songs, but he also wrote over 50 songs for other artists in the 70s alone. The godfather of soul, James Brown, dominated during the 1970s with his spectacular blend of funk and soul. His vocals were, as well as dance moves, created performances that were unparalleled. Brown was also a social activist that worked to promote Black empowerment and pride. He was indeed super bad in the very best way. The 1980s are remembered for bright colors, bold fashion, but also for an era of music that led to some of the most famous performers in history. Several different genres were impacted and even brought into the mainstream. While he may have gotten his start at Motown as just a little boy, the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, absolutely owned the 1980s. While the world was familiar with his work and loved him as an artist, his 1982 album, Thriller, cemented his legacy as a transcendent talent. Jackson's influence is hard to measure in terms of subsequent artists and their style. If Michael Jackson was number one, then number 1B would be Prince. During the 1980s, Prince released 9 albums. This extraordinary talent could play at least 27 instruments and pen songs for countless other artists. The albums 1999 and Purple Rain launched Prince to not only commercial success, but revolutionary status during the 80s. Tina Turner was known as a musical artist long before the 80s. However, it is during this time that she marked herself as a legend solo artist with her 1984 single, What's Love Got to Do with It? Turner's mark on the industry was forever changed. The queen of rock and roll became a cultural icon and is one of the greatest musical influences to the individual that has won the most Grammys in history. While hip-hop got its start in the 70s, it was LL Cool J that helped rappers see commercial prominence. LL Cool J's debut album, Radio, showed the world that LL was a powerful rapper. LL was one of the first rappers to have mainstream commercial success, along with Run DMC and Curtis Blow. LL Cool J was the first hip-hop act on American Bandstand and the first rapper to receive the Kennedy Center honors. If there was a way to pinpoint the origins of the boy band as we know it today, it would be New Edition. From their incredible harmonies as R&B and New Jack Swing artist, New Edition was a pioneer in what we call boy bands. It was no longer enough to be able to have great vocals, but the ability to partner that with complex choreography and showmanship makes New Edition legends in their own right. The 90s was an era of music that featured amazing vocalists as well as many rappers, becoming household names. Only someone with the vocal talent of Whitney Houston could be known as The Voice. With her origins in her home church, Whitney Houston got her professional singing career started in the 80s, but the 1990s belonged to her, starting with her album I'm Your Baby Tonight, followed by her 1991 rendition of the Star Spangled Banner at Super Bowl 25. Houston was off to an amazing decade. However, it was her work on the Bodyguard soundtrack that sent her off to another level. Whitney's unmatched vocal talent and ability to move between ballads and pop have left an undeniable mark on Black music. If Whitney Houston is the greatest female vocalist, then the Velvet Voice, Luther Vandross, is the greatest male vocalist. Another artist that got his start in the 80s but had his greatest success in the 1990s Luther Vandross was an undeniable R&B talent. His 1991 award-winning album, Power of Love, was well received and continued his commercial success as an artist. The range and acrobatic nature of his sound make Luther a musical legend. As hip-hop continued to grow and evolve, Public Enemy exploded on the scene in the late 80s. However, in the 90s, the popularity had continued to grow. Combining skilled lyricists and political messaging, Public Enemy had a significant influence on rap as a mainstream art form. Their most successful album was Fear of a Black Planet, released in 1990. This group used their platform to highlight disparities and injustice. What Public Enemy was to New York, Outkast was to the South. This hip-hop duo broke into music during the East Coast and West Coast rap. Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music was their debut album. AT-Aliens and Aquemini followed and laid the foundation for Southern rappers to be widely accepted. Continuing their work into the 2000s, Outkast had an undeniable influence on the shape of hip-hop. At the turn of the century, many things were happening. Music was no longer dominated by crooners, nor did it have the same number of musicians in the recording studio. Technology had become king, even in music. Breaking into music in the 90s, Erykah Badu had a resurgence in the 2000s with her album Mama's Gun. This resurgence continued the growth of neo-soul as a popular genre for African Americans. The influence of soul music blended with the heavy use of technology in R&B led to a new sound. Badu's unique ability to sing as well as rap likens her to other artists in the genre, such as Lauryn Hill. Even though neo-soul was growing, R&B remained a staple in black music. Usher got his start in the 90s, but became one of the most commercially successful artists in the 2000s. Albums such as 8701 and Confessions cemented him as an artist, greatly influenced by Michael Jackson, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder. Usher is known as the Prince of R&B. He is even a top influence of Chris Brown. Brown combines vocal talent as well as a penchant for dancing to put on fantastic live shows. Brown recently surpassed Elvis for the most Billboard Hot 100 entries for a male artist. He also surpassed James Brown for Billboard Hot 100 entries for R&B singers. Brown had other influences such as James Brown and R. Kelly. Beyonce rose to stardom with Destiny's Child. They became one of the best-selling girl groups in history. Beyonce released her debut solo album in 2003, Dangerously in Love. The album was wildly successful and launched Beyonce towards becoming one of the best-selling female artists as well as one of the most honored at the Grammys of all time. Queen Bee was greatly influenced by Michael Jackson, Anita Baker, and Tina Turner.